The Last Lighthouse Keeper. The lighthouse at Cape Meridian had been automated for 43 years when I arrived. No human hand had turned its mechanisms. No human eye had watched the storms from its tower since 1979. But the Coast Guard still needed someone to maintain it, to ensure the automated systems ran smoothly, to be the backup when technology failed. That someone, in the autumn of 2022, became me. My name is Thomas Webb, and I was running from a life that had imploded, a failed marriage, a career in journalism that ended when I refused to compromise my integrity for clicks and viral content. Friends who had slowly drifted away as I became someone even I didn't recognize. At 46 years old, I'd become a stranger to myself. The job posting was simple. Lighthouse keeper needed, remote location, solitude required, must be comfortable with isolation. It might as well have said, wanted, someone with nothing left to lose. I took it. The lighthouse stood on a rocky promontory that jutted into the Atlantic like a defiant fist. The nearest town, Mercy's Harbor, was 12 miles away down a winding coastal road that became impassable during winter storms. The keeper's cottage was a small weathered structure that clung to the cliff as if afraid of being swept into the sea. Inside it was sparse but functional. A wood stove, a bed, a desk, shelves lined with logbooks dating back to 1847. The automation system was remarkably simple. I had to check it twice daily, maintain the backup generator, and keep weather logs. The rest of my time was my own. The solitude I had requested, perhaps even craved, was absolute. For the first 3 weeks, I reveled in it. I woke with the sun, made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and watched the ocean transform from gray to silver to deep blue. I read the logbooks, fascinated by the terse entries of keepers past. Heavy fog, 3 vessels passed, beans for dinner. These men had lived entire lives in these few rooms, their existence distilled to weather patterns and passing ships. But by the 4th week, the silence began to change. It stopped being peaceful and became oppressive. It stopped being a refuge and became a prison I had built for myself. That's when I found the journal. It was tucked behind a loose board in the cottage's only closet, wrapped in oilcloth that had kept it miraculously dry despite decades of coastal damp. The leather cover was worn smooth, the pages yellowed but still legible. On the first page, in elegant script, were the words, "The Private Journal of Eleanor Hartwell. If found after my death, please send to my daughter, Margaret, in Boston. If found during my life, please respect my privacy and return it. June 1st, 1952. I should have reported it. I should have sent it to the Coast Guard, who would have tried to track down descendants. But I didn't. Instead, that night, with the wind howling outside and the lighthouse beam sweeping its eternal circle, I began to read. Eleanor Hartwell had come to Cape Meridian in the spring of 1952, following her husband Samuel, who had been appointed lighthouse keeper. She was 28 years old, a graduate of Radcliffe College, a pianist who had performed with the Boston Symphony Orchestra. She had given up everything to follow a man she loved to the edge of the world. Her early entries were full of wonder. She described the way the light shattered on the waves, the seals that sunbathed on the rocks, the wild roses that somehow thrived in the salt air. She wrote about learning to make bread, to predict weather, to find contentment in simplicity. But then in the autumn of 1952, everything changed. October 15th, 1952. Samuel is gone. The storm came suddenly, as they do here. He went to secure the boat and never returned. They found it 3 days later, smashed against the rocks 2 miles down the coast. They didn't find him. They say the current took him. They say I should leave. They say no woman can keep a lighthouse alone. They don't know me very well. Eleanor Hartwell had done the impossible. She had convinced the Coast Guard to let her stay on as keeper. In 1952, when women were expected to retreat from such challenges, she had stayed, and she had kept the light burning for 23 more years. Night after night, I read Eleanor's journal. Her words became my companions. I learned that she had taught herself navigation, meteorology, and mechanics. I learned that she had corresponded with scientists studying marine biology, sending them detailed observations of whale migrations and fish populations. I learned that she had written poetry, though she never tried to publish it. But I also learned about her loneliness, about nights when the isolation felt like a physical weight, about the constant battle against depression, against the voice that whispered that she should give up, that her life had become too small, too meaningless. March 3rd, 1967, 15 years today, since Samuel died. I sometimes wonder if I've been living or just existing. The light goes on every night, whether I'm here or not. The ships pass, whether I watch them or not. What difference does one person make in the machinery of the world? But then I remember, someone has to bear witness. Someone has to watch. Someone has to care. If not me, then who? Reading those words, I felt something crack open inside me. I had come here to escape, to hide from a world that had disappointed me. But Eleanor had stayed to serve, to maintain something larger than herself, even when no one was watching. I began to change my routine. Instead of just checking the automated systems, I started truly maintaining the lighthouse. I painted the exterior, repaired the weathered keeper's cottage, restored the old Fresnel lens that had been replaced by modern LED lights, but still sat in storage. I started keeping detailed weather logs, not because I had to, but because someone should. And I started writing again. Not journalism this time, not the kind of writing designed to capture attention and generate outrage. Instead, I wrote about what I saw, the way ice formed on the rocks in winter, creating sculptures that lasted only until the tide changed. The family of otters that had made the cove below the lighthouse their home. The cargo ship that passed every Tuesday at 3 p.m., so regular I could set my watch by it. I wrote about Eleanor, too. I began researching her life, using the satellite internet connection to dig through archives. I found her daughter Margaret's obituary from 2018. I found a mention of Eleanor in a book about women lighthouse keepers. I found that she had died in 1975, at the age of 51, of a heart attack, alone in the cottage where I now lived. I found that no one had ever claimed her journal. The storm came in February, announced by the barometer's sudden drop and the strange yellow quality of the winter light. I had been at the lighthouse for 5 months, and I thought I understood its moods. I was wrong. The wind hit like a physical blow, strong enough to make the cottage shudder. Rain came horizontally, mixed with sleet and sea spray. The automated lighthouse continued its rotation, but the backup generator failed in the first hour. I spent the next 6 hours in the tower, manually ensuring the light continued to burn, just as Eleanor would have done. At some point during that endless night, with the wind screaming and the waves crashing against the rocks 100 feet below, I understood why she had stayed. It wasn't about the light. It wasn't even about the ships that depended on it. It was about the act of staying itself, about choosing to remain at your post when everything in you wants to run, about being the person who keeps the promise when no one is watching. Through the tower windows, between the sweeps of the light, I saw something that made my heart stop. A small boat, barely more than a dinghy, fighting the waves. Even through the chaos of the storm, I could see there was someone in it. I grabbed the radio, called the Coast Guard. They were already responding to 3 other emergencies. The helicopter couldn't fly in these conditions. The nearest rescue boat was 40 minutes away. The person in that dinghy didn't have 40 minutes. I did the only thing I could do. I kept the light burning and I watched, bearing witness to what I was certain would be a tragedy. But the person in that boat was a fighter. Through skill or luck or divine intervention, they rode the waves toward the rocky beach below the lighthouse. I ran from the tower, grabbed every rope I had, and made my way down the treacherous path to the cove. The boat shattered on the rocks, but the person had already jumped clear. I threw the rope, they caught it, and together through the wind and rain and darkness, we made it back to solid ground. The person I pulled from the sea that night was a young woman named Sarah Chen, a marine biologist whose research vessel had been caught in the storm. She had taken the dinghy to collect equipment samples and been swept away when the storm hit faster than predicted. We sat in the cottage that night, wrapped in blankets, drinking coffee, waiting for the Coast Guard helicopter that would arrive at dawn, and I told her about Eleanor. "I've heard of her," Sarah said, her hands wrapped around the mug. "There's a paper from 1965 in the Journal of Marine Biology that cites observations from E. Hartwell, Cape Meridian Lighthouse. She documented a pod of right whales that had never been seen that far north before. Her observations helped establish their migration patterns. We still use that data." I felt tears on my face. Eleanor's watch had mattered. Her witness had mattered. All those years of careful notation, of staying, of caring when she thought no one was watching. They had mattered. "She never knew," I said. "She died thinking she was just filling logbooks that no one would read." "But she kept filling them anyway," Sarah said. "That's what makes it matter." When spring came to Cape Meridian, I faced a choice. My 1-year contract was ending. I could request another year, or I could return to the world I had fled. I thought about Eleanor's daughter, Margaret, who had never received her mother's journal, who had never known about the poetry, the observations, the depth of her mother's interior life, who had perhaps spent her own life wondering if her mother's choice to stay had been worth it. I made copies of Eleanor's journal and sent them to the Maritime Museum in Boston, to the Marine Biological Laboratory, to the archives of the Coast Guard. I kept the original, but I made sure her words, her witness, would outlive me. And then I made my own choice. I left Cape Meridian. But I didn't run away this time. I ran toward something. I took a job with a nonprofit that documents and preserves lighthouse histories. I work with communities to save these structures, to honor the people who kept them, to tell stories like Eleanor's. I write again, but differently now. I write to preserve, to witness, to ensure that lives lived in quiet service aren't forgotten. I write to remind people that choosing to stay, choosing to care, choosing to keep your light burning, even when the darkness seems overwhelming, that these choices matter, even if we never see how. Last month I returned to Cape Meridian for the first time in 3 years. The lighthouse still stands, still automated, still sweeping its beam across the dark water. The cottage has a new keeper, a young man who, like me, had come to the edge of the world looking for something. I gave him a copy of Eleanor's journal. "Read this," I said, "and remember, the light goes on whether you're watching or not. But you're here to watch anyway. You're here to care when no one else is looking. You're here to bear witness. That's the job. That's always been the job." He nodded, Understanding or not understanding, time would tell. As I drove away, I looked back one last time at the lighthouse, at that defiant finger of light pushing back against the darkness, and I thought about Eleanor, about all the lighthouse keepers throughout history, about everyone who has ever chosen to stay at their post, to keep their promises, to tend their light. We are all lighthouse keepers in the end. We all have something we're meant to keep burning. The question is whether we'll have the courage to stay when the storms come. Whether we'll keep the light burning even when we think no one is watching. Eleanor did, and because of her, so do I. Thank you.